Let's start first with the Minnesota Golden Gophers and the North Carolina Tarheels. That is the first game chronologically. That will happen on a Thursday night. I will be there. One of the more intriguing Big Ten football games has the Minnesota Golden Gophers hosting the Tar Heels of North Carolina Thursday night on Fox. Now, when I first start to break down this matchup, I was at an event last week at the University of Minnesota, a football event over there, a really great event. Tasted some great foods that you're going to see at the Minnesota concession stands here this week. Talking to some staffers from Minnesota, there was a quote that I thought was very interesting that I heard that I had in conversation. They got dudes, we got dudes. And I think there's two different sets of dudes. I think there's two certain ways that both of these teams want to win this football game. So let's get right into it. Why don't we? Talking about this matchup, dudes versus dudes, North Carolina taking on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, this line on this matchup originally favored the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But on Monday, this thing flipped. Now -1.5 in favor of the Tar Heels of North Carolina. I think a big reason why this thing flipped in favor of Mack Brown and the Baby Blues is because of the status of Darius Taylor and Daniel Jackson. A couple of weeks ago, it was reported Darius Taylor limping at practice, Daniel Jackson maybe overcoming some injuries as well, maybe banged up a little bit. PJ Fleck at the time said, hey, those guys are going to be fine. But there's still some question marks as it pertains to those two guys. If those two guys, top running back, top receiver, are not ready to go by the time this game, or I should say that this way, if those two guys are not playing at full 100%, then I think this thing changes a lot, because especially Darius Taylor, Minnesota, and I'll get into it, Minnesota is so dependent, I think, in what Darius Taylor brings to the table in this football game to play the way they want to play. Another big question throughout this game is North Carolina's quarterback situation. It was reported a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, Mack Brown, he's not releasing any depth charts. Look, we know how close PJ Fleck plays to the vest as well as it pertains to injury, as it pertains to information and access that he gives to his football program. So that's what I think makes this game so fun. I think that's what it makes it so interesting and intriguing, is this gamesmanship, this chess match between these two coaches that historically really don't offer a lot. So we go into this game, I think, with a lot of mystery, and I think we could see a lot of fun action up and down the field. Of course, the quarterback situation, I think it favors Max Johnson personally. Look, he's got 4 years of experience, 2 years at LSU, 2 years of Texas A&M. Look, you could see some other guys into the fold as well. But whoever is at quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels, look, you had a first-round draft pick. You had Drake May, who was drafted highly in the first round of the NFL draft. You're going to take a step back at the quarterback position. Another place that North Carolina is going to take a step back is on the offensive line. The Tar Heels lose 4 of their 5 starters up front. And that's where I want to start with this preview, in talking about what Minnesota can really attack on North Carolina. When you look at the matchup on the line of scrimmage, when North Carolina has the football, I think it favors Minnesota. I think the line of scrimmage on both sides favors the Golden Gophers. PJ Fleck really needs to play into that. Okay, you've got 2 sophomores slated to start at tackle, and then you've got pass rushers like John Joyner. You got Danny Strigo in the middle. You got Jalen Logan Redding. You got Devin Eastern. Like, you've got a lot of good depth on the defensive line. I think they're going to rotate some pieces throughout that as well. They need to get into the face of Max Johnson or whoever is starting at quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels. Because if this Tar Heel offense is able to have their routes develop down the field, if the quarterback is able to get the ball into the hands of these playmakers, that could equal some problems for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. When you look at North Carolina, they returned 5 of their 6 leading pass catchers from last season. Basically, they return everybody minus Tez Walker. There's a lot of really good players. Nate McCollum, who had a big catch in this game last season, touchdown. J.J. Jones, tight end Bryson Nesbitt as well down the field. And then when you look at Minnesota and their defense, the strength, I believe, is in the front seven. The weakness is on the back end in the secondary. We saw that in last year's matchup where this team, where Drake May unleashed throwing the ball down the field. He got confidence. He got into a rhythm. 414 yards. And that was a secondary with Tyler Nubin. Now you don't have Nubin back there. That's a big question, I think, for Minnesota. Minnesota cannot let North Carolina get into a rhythm in this passing game. They can't. If they do, I think North Carolina could put up a good amount of points in this matchup. So you need to let these dogs eat on the defensive line. Because if that front group, I mentioned the names up front for Minnesota, if that front group can't get pressure on their own, and that's a defensive coordinator's dream, to have your front defensive line be the guys that continuously get pressure on the quarterback. But now all of a sudden you got to send defensive backs, you got to send linebackers, and now that puts some of your corners, your nickels, etc. into one-on-one matchups against these playmakers down the field for North Carolina. And those guys, if you bring extra guys, they better get home. Quarterbacks for North Carolina cannot sit in the pocket and be comfortable. I thought one thing that was very interesting about last year's game was Amarian Hampton. Look, throughout the season last year, this was a guy that rushed for over 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. Certainly one of the best backs in the ACC, if not all of college football, the way he runs the ball. But when he faced Minnesota, he didn't run the football very well. 13 carries, 46 yards. He did get into the end zone, but Minnesota did a really good job containing him last year. Now I think they're going to need to do that again, because now all of a sudden, with a quarterback that isn't a first-round draft pick, now all of a sudden, if this offense becomes balanced and Amarian Hampton is able to get his in the run game, I think that takes pressure off. It puts this Minnesota defense on their heels a little bit, and it allows the playbook to be expanded that much more for Mack Brown and this North Carolina Tar Heels team as well. So I think a really good scenario, I won't say a perfect scenario, but a really good scenario I think for Minnesota would be, hey, let's contain Amarian Hampton. Let's hold him under 100 yards once again in the rush game. And even though the throw game, the weapons on the outside, it could be the strengths of this North Carolina offense, let's attack. Let's get them into third and longs, and let's let our boys eat up front. I think those are the situations that you want to get North Carolina into as well. Let's talk about this from the Minnesota offensive point of view. You see the last bullet point on the graphic there. Can they play their way? The Minnesota way, pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. Darius Taylor and this run game is so important to the success of Minnesota, not only in this football game, but throughout this 2024 season as well. Gotta start off the right way, because your offense could be your best defense in this football game as well. If you can dominate the line of scrimmage, if you can dominate with the run game, and we know PJ Fleck wants to do that, wants to be physical at the point of attack. It certainly leans into what Minnesota, how they've built their team, what their personnel certainly looks like. So if they can dominate with the run game, keep those explosive weapons on the sidelines, and then wear down this North Carolina front, hands on hips. We want to see that North Carolina defensive line late third quarter, early fourth quarter, with their hands on their hips. You want to see them gassed. And then you want to rotate guys at running back. They've brought in a lot of running back depth this season. So you want to see that for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. You want to be able to wear them down. Running the ball well on first down is going to be a key to set up favorable second and third down and shorts, as well, to keep on moving the football down the field as well. It's so important to set the tone early in this game, because if you have a 10-point deficit where North Carolina is leading in the fourth quarter, can Max Brosmer lead you back? Can Max Brosmer connect with some of these targets? Because outside of Daniel Jackson, I think there are some questions with Elijah Spencer. There's some questions with Le'Meke Brockington, maybe in this pass game. I think that's an answer. That's something we're going to see answered in this game. How good is Max Brosmer? Like we've seen all of the box scores. We've seen all of the stats. We've seen all of the tape with him at the FCS level and how he can spin it at that level. Can he do it against a Power 4 type of team in the North Carolina Tar Heels as well? Darius Taylor had a lot of success against UNC last year, rushing for 138 yards. If they get him going early, I think Minnesota could control this football game. Let's talk about weather for a minute. 80% chance of rain earlier in the day. It's around 50-50 at the time of kickoff. That certainly favors Minnesota, right? If we get some elements where maybe it's a little bit more difficult to throw the football down the field, I think that plays into the hands of PJ Fleck. I think that plays into the hands of Minnesota, where this game could be slowed down a little bit and let this offensive line eat. I mentioned the advantage in the trenches on defense, and I think like Minnesota, I think has one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten, certainly. I think that they could have a really good day going straight at them, eating some big-time meals up front against the North Carolina Tar Heels. It's going to be that contrast of styles. North Carolina wants to make plays down the field. Minnesota maybe wants to play this game in a box a little bit and play that traditional Big Ten style of play. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see this one go down in Minneapolis.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.